What's up guys, Cody here. I'm on day 77 of the Odin project, and today I had two things right off the back that I had to deal with. Specifically, they were bugs that were left over from yesterday that I didn't realize were there. So let's take a look at the screen real quick and we'll show you what those bugs actually were. So I'm going to show you a recording that I had from earlier today. And so this is a user going through the game and it's going well. They are progressing. They're on the submit score screen now. And you can see they've made it to the leaderboard. They hit play again, so they're doing it again. You see, this is where a problem comes in. So they clicked on one character, and it immediately went to the submit score screen without having to click on all the other characters. In addition to that, you can see here that the time on the submit score screen is also progressing. And so this is the second time that they're going through the game, and essentially, the time should have been stopped at this point. It did the first time around. We didn't see that timer moving. And we also shouldn't have had the characters' found attributes to be all true, which is what was causing that jump from the game screen to the submit score screen, even when just only one character was being found. So I'm going to show you guys now what I did to fix those two things, and then I'll move on to the rest of what I did today. The first thing that I was able to fix was the time discrepancy. So on the submit score screen, the time kept going when the user was on their second play of the game. What I found out was this was another one of those side effects that I should have been using useEffect to handle. I essentially rewrote the code that I was using here specifically to monitor this game screen variable, which was very similar to those other screen variables that I had set before. I didn't have a game screen variable for the game screen before. Now I do. And I'm using that game screen to run this logic here, which the logic is to start the timer if the game screen is true and actually start the interval counting upwards. If the game screen is no longer true or it turns to false, then it's going to run this down here, which is going to clear the interval and set the interval current to null. I'm using this use reference, so that's why I'm doing some of this kind of stuff down here, how I'm treating it. In addition to that, I also added in this component dismount, just in case in the future I ever navigate away from the app component with something that I build out with this. But the core of solving the problem was actually making sure that the interval was being cleared properly. And in order to do that, I needed to actually use this effect hook. For the characters problem, so that one was a bit more straightforward. I actually just needed to add this characters found state to the dependencies for the callback. So this is going to be a function that's run within another component, a subcomponent. Specifically, when the user was clicking on the first character for their second time through the game, this logic was being run right here because the characters found that was being used, the state that was being used was from the first game. And even though I had set it elsewhere, it wasn't being handled properly because it wasn't showing up as a dependency for this callback. So that's why it wasn't updating properly and the game would just progress directly to the submit score screen. In addition to that, I also took the time to do a similar thing since it was a side effect that was going on as well. I decided to take the actual set characters found state kind of modifier and the set seconds and minutes, and so the time setters, and put those into a useEffect hook as well, dependent on the leaderboard screen for the updating of them. If you remember, I had some of that within these functions here, within these callback functions, but I actually decided to separate it out so that I'm doing a little bit more distinct things here with these screens that are actually rendering new components, whereas this is modifying the state within just the component and not making new states and components actually come up. The next couple of things, just like random stuff here and there, just to make things a bit more readable. First thing that I decided to do, as I mentioned earlier, I had set variables for each one of the screens now. I also wanted to be consistent how I was naming these screens, so I changed the leaderboard display to leaderboard screen, and then I also changed component names to all have screen within them. So it was pretty clear what I'm doing with those and how these states are affecting, like what will these states be affecting. So I did a little bit of that. And then I also created a start screen component just to be consistent with the other screens and how I'm rendering them. So here's the start screen component. Nothing really new here except for the GlowingWaldo. I'll come back to that in a little bit. But yeah, it's pretty much the same thing that I had yesterday in regards to the start screen, except now it's in a component. So just trying to be consistent and kind of predictable in how I'm setting up my rendering and my components. The next thing that I did was actually create this connect to database function, which essentially, if we go here, this bit of code was being run in several different places throughout my components, and they all utilize this same pattern here. So I realized I could take that pattern out, this code, and abstract it a little bit. So I decided to separate this out and make it into its own function for importing into other components. I did not necessarily make it so that this won't run over and over and over again because of the way I'm calling it. I am actually running this all over again. What I did was I just made it a little bit more clean to read the actual connections here and just making the components a little bit easier to read without these repeating blocks of code being put within the JavaScript. So we have one there. We have two other places where that's also being utilized. If I wanted to actually have this not necessarily being repeated, then I could pass this as a property and a use callback on the app level and send it down to the components that need it. That may be another thing for another day, but it works well enough right now that I'm not too concerned about it. All right, the last thing that I did today, it was a little bit more interesting, and it's actually where that GlowingWaldo component comes in. I won't show you the GlowingWaldo component because it's just a large SVG, and I didn't really write that out. I used some helpers online, some websites to actually generate that SVG. But I'll show you what the styling that I did this afternoon looks like and kind of show you where I netted out with that. Okay, so here it is, the Where's Waldo app, now freshly styled with retro arcade glowing text. So yeah, main things that I did here, I'm using a specific font for making it look like an arcade game. I think it's called like Player 2. It's a Google font that I have from Google Fonts. And this is the GlowingWaldo. That's that one component. I made that component because I'm using it in two places. And also the SVG for it is crazy complicated, so it was better to have that as a component and then reference that component in the locations that I needed it. And then lastly was actually making some buttons and inputs actually styled instead of just the default. So no more looking at the plain screen. We have this textured screen with font and appropriate coloring and some nice hovering effects as well. So I'm going to run through the game and show you guys the rest of the styling. I'm not going to go into the styling today. If you guys are interested, then let me know in the comments below, and I will make a separate video just to show what those things are. But these are some fairly common, fairly well-known CSS tricks that you can Google pretty easily. So nothing too fancy going on here, but if you are interested, I can go into that in a little bit more detail. But let's dive into this game and I'll show you guys what it looks like now. All right, so click and start, and I got that styling here. So we got that cool kind of gaming timer right here. And I also added some coloring down here to these selection pieces, and I'm liking the look of this overall. I'm pretty satisfied with how it has come out. And I think I could do a little bit better here with sizing of things and relative sizing and putting more of a hierarchy into it. But for a very simple game, I think it's pretty okay. And yeah, here's the input. So we actually have some effect going on here. And lastly, I can submit score. Before I submit this, I am going to say I did one other thing today, which was prevent this input from being submitted without any value in it. So if the user clicks submit score right now, they can't actually go to the leaderboard screen. It won't submit their score. If they entered a bunch of spaces, they also cannot enter those spaces into the database as well. And that's actually dealt with the logic that's right here. First, we have checking if the username is null. If it's not null, then that's good. But in addition to that, it also needs to not be an empty string. And in addition to that, once the username is trimmed of any spaces, that includes tabs and I think returns, then the length should be greater than 0. That would suggest that it has some sort of alphanumeric characters in it. And if all three of these conditions are met, then it'll actually set them to the database. So let me do that now. So I do have some spaces in there, I think, somewhere. Yeah, I'm going to get rid of those spaces. But really, those spaces shouldn't have really affected it unless I just did the spaces themselves. And I'm going to submit this. And, oh, dang, okay. Gotta go back through the game to get to the leaderboard because I want to show you guys what that looks like. So let me type this in again. Boom. Okay, and there's the leaderboard, and there's a smaller glowing Where's Waldo. As you can see, D is at the top right now, and I have played this game quite a bit today, so I'm kind of tired of it, and I am getting ready for bed now. So, sorry guys, my camera got full on memory. So I was just talking about the leaderboard. I pretty much finished up. You guys saw me go through the app twice, and there wasn't the error with the submit screen score timer continuing to progress or the first correct character continuing to the submit screen score. So I fixed those two bugs. I tried to clean things up today, and I actually got some styling in to make it look half decent, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. Again, if you have questions about anything that was shown today, let me know. If you would like me to create a video about the CSS for doing the retro arcade game styling, then let me know in the comments below. If you want to follow mine and Emily's journey into web dev, definitely subscribe and like this video if you're liking the content that I'm producing with this video. And lastly, tomorrow we have our weekly update, trying to get back into those. So we'll see you guys tomorrow.